أهلا ومرحبا ببودكاست تدات. أنا اسمي خالد الطوخي. أنا باحث في قسم المالية العامة صندوق النقد الدولي. Hello and welcome everyone to the TADAT podcast. My name is Khalid Al-Touhi. I'm from the Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF. After this morning's intervention, we will open the floor to questions and we invite all of our live audience to participate in today's discussion. You can send us your questions through the live YouTube chat or to podcast@tadat.org. Once again, podcast@tadat.org. Joining us today, I'm happy to welcome Dr. Grace Thomson and Abdelhamid Atallah. Dr. Thomson is the academic director at Cert, the corporate arm of the higher colleges of technologies. She leads expert teams in the conceptualization and operation of two academies, VAT Academy and the Tax Academy. The Tax Academy, which was inaugurated in 2018 as the VAT Academy, supports capacity development in tax policy regulation, tax administration, and compliance in the government functions and private sector. In 2022, the Academy expanded the scope to respond to changes in the taxation landscape of the nation, driven by the announcement of the introduction of corporate taxes in the UAE by 2023, next year. Dr. Thomson and the Tax Academy team have set clear strategic goals of strengthening the tax capacity of the UAE, fostering collaboration between academia, the private sector, and government to increase readiness in evolving taxation scenarios. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Grace.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
We also welcome Abdelhamid Atallah. Abdelhamid is a lead faculty at Cert Academy. He previously served as the MEA Corporate Tax Director for General Electric, supported by a team of up to 20 colleagues. He was also responsible for tax strategy across the Middle East and Africa. Prior to this, Abdelhamid worked for both PwC and Arthur Andersen in the UK and the US between 1986 and 1997. And for many years, he was with KPMG as the senior tax partner in Egypt and chief operating officer of KPMG's tax practice across the Middle East and South Asia region. Abdelhamid obviously brings a wealth of expertise and industry experience and serves multinational clients across the region. He's a registered tax agent in the UAE and has been published on numerous occasions, including International Tax Review, and is a regular speaker on conferences and tax meetings. He's fluent in English and Arabic and is both a US CPA and Egyptian chartered accountant with a bachelor degree from Cairo University and Master of Taxation at American University in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Khalid. Shukran jazilan, and thank you for having me on the podcast, and thank you to all. And we look forward to a very productive podcast, inshallah.
Welcome to both of you. Thank you. Thank you again. I want to start the discussion by asking you about the developments that you've been seeing recently in the tax administration, specifically in the Gulf region. And we can just take both of your opinions first on what has been some of the things that you see as highlights in tax developments. Dr. Grace?
Yes, I can start. For the past 4 years, since 2018, much earlier than that, 2016, I think that there were very important decisions and agreements in the GCC states in regards to fiscal reform in each one of these countries. So since 2017 and of course 2018, when the UAE and KSA took the leadership in introducing VAT, since then the majority of the member states of the GCC have taken this lead and have implemented these reforms. I think that transformation that started to occur since then had major implications in several aspects of the society of those nations. Speaking particularly about the UAE, it was really an important development because it allowed the thought process about a different type of capacity building. Now we were talking about taxation professionals. We're talking about a taxation ecosystem that had to be enabled. The corporations, the civil society, all aligned to try to achieve the ambitious goal of starting with the process in 2018. So I think and from the balance of these 4 years, particularly in nations that are as young as the Gulf region nations, it is really commendable that these reforms have occurred and have been happening in these past 4 years with a very positive outlook in implementation. So in the UAE, for example, with the announcement of the introduction of the corporate taxes for next year, given the lessons that we learned from the process of entering the VAT implementation, I think that all of us, the corporations, industry, academia, are going to be best prepared to start the planning ahead of time to make sure that all of us are ready for a successful implementation.
Thank you for the answer. Abdul Hamid, do you have anything to add on this?
Thank you, Khaled. Thank you, Dr. Grace. Yes, I agree with what Dr. Grace said. Fiscal reform has been going on in the GCC and in the UAE and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for several years now. And I think one of the elements of that reform is the introduction of taxation, whether it's taxation on consumption, which is VAT, or in the UAE, basically income tax arising from trade or business. So mainly businesses and companies. So that has resulted in the expansion of the scope of work of existing tax authorities, like in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or in Kuwait or in Oman, or the establishment of a new federal tax authority in the UAE, which basically came into existence in 2017. As we see every day, there is more and more reform being implemented. It's driven globally by the agreement globally on the minimum tax, effective tax to be implemented globally, and also on the taxation of certain countries, taxation of certain companies in the countries where the revenue arises, not where they are exactly or legally registered. So take an example, the UAE, it started in 2017, it dealt with VAT, dealt with excise tax, that was in 2017. We're now in 2022, they are basically going to deal with income tax, tax residence certificates, economic substance. So all that requires basically an expansion in the scope, which creates challenges, which so far has been well dealt with by the tax administrations in the region, but it will continue, hiring of new people, training them, bringing them up to speed with the reforms and the global tax changes that are happening, building expertise, automation of the tax administration. So all these issues are now really a part of the day-to-day discussion of the government with the civil society and with the business community.
Thank you for the answer. You both kind of mentioned the fact that these taxes were a new introduction in the countries in the region, and that they came with specific challenges. I just was wondering if there's anything you wanted to highlight specifically about how these challenges were overcome. Dr. Grace said the lessons learned will be taken forward, for example, in the introduction of the income tax.
Well, I think that there's a very important, I would say a common finding in regards to the general challenges that countries go through in implementation of tax reforms. Of course, it's more prevalent when you make those measurements of the impact of the reforms on the early stages of the implementation of that reform. Some of the studies that analyze what are the most important areas of reform that countries recognize that they should have always point at legislation, always point at processes and procedures. It also points at the need of a communication between the tax administrations and the society. And so one can then infer that if those are patterns and expectations that countries that are mature enough implementing taxation systems highlight, this will be even more prevalent in young nations like ours, and in nations that are in a very early stage of maturity in the implementation of the tax systems. So laws and regulations is one default, but I think that when we go deeper, it also requires an understanding of the needs to change processes and procedures within the organizations, within the corporations, in order to be best ready to be compliant and comply voluntarily. But at the same time, the tax administrations also have an important responsibility, and the responsibility is to maintain that two-way communication. And I think that UAE has done it quite well, maintain an open communication, especially at the early stages of the implementation of VAT in 2018. They had consultative sessions, and then they implemented the federal tax agent requirement. So they took this very seriously. So that communication between the tax administrations and the society and the corporations, it's essential. With this, the system will be based on trust. And so if the organizations trust the tax administration, then this voluntary compliance will be more likely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Abdulhamid, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to this as well.
Yeah, I think there are 2 points, mainly the automation of the processes of the tax authorities, tax administrations. I mean, for example, the UAE embarked on registering taxpayers in the beginning of 2018, or during 2017 and 2018. They succeeded in registering over 300,000 taxpayers. So I think automation regarding registering taxpayers, filing of tax returns, amending tax returns, filing of appeals, all that, I think now the world is heading towards lessening the sort of the personal interaction and making everything done via internet and via email, and maintaining the data and records of taxpayers on an electronic basis. So that's going to be, again, a continuing challenge in order to upgrade the system and to improve the systems. Second thing is the continuing communication and dialogue. And being proactive in adjusting or amending tax laws or regulations, which in practice we find that are not basically producing the results that are required. As an example, the UAE, for example, amended the penalty system recently in order to basically improve the system and to encourage people to come forward. If they have any issues, if they have any errors, to come forward and file and basically have less penalties than was there previously. That's a good sign that we're seeing the tax administrations are acting based on what they see on a day-to-day basis. They are welcoming the dialogue. There is training sessions for the tax agents on an ongoing basis. So we look forward to that for the corporate income tax, but also in other countries in the region. Oman introduced VAT. They're doing the same thing. Saudi Arabia is doing a great thing. Their website has a lot of information and details similar to the UAE and Oman and Bahrain. And I think it's very encouraging what we are seeing, that the communication and dialogue is maintained, and there is a lot of actions being taken to overcome the concerns of taxpayers.
Thank you. Yeah. So some of these challenges are unique to the region, definitely, and some other challenges are more common to any country that's trying to evolve its tax system. So I want to take both of your opinions on how these international best practices or good practices or experiences of other countries have influenced decisions in the region and how they've been leveraged either in the past or in the future for advancing tax administrations.
Well, I think there's always an expectation that those experiences that other countries have had or continue to have, and the guidelines that are shared globally will be an important factor to consider by the tax administrations of the Gulf region to adopt these best practices. I think that the advantage that we have as young nations and young taxation systems is that we can leapfrog those difficulties that maybe other countries had to go through by learning from those different best practices and the things that didn't go well. There are different mechanisms, and IMF is as a multilateral organization supporting the nations, puts two economies like the UAE and the ones in the Gulf region with a myriad set of resources to do this well. And precisely one of those resources and one of those, that framework of best practices is one that Tadat brings to us. I mean, when we started all the different process at the Tax Academy, at that time VAT Academy, to have a framework of reference to support the goals of the country in building capacity not only in the natural tax accountancy that we tend to think that that's the only profession that needs to be up to speed when tax reform takes place. It's not only tax accountancy. We have the legal system, the judicial system. We have all the system that is behind risk management. And so all these aspects of the implementation of a reform are reflected in the framework of that Tadat assessment has for the countries. And so when we started to analyze a little bit more that framework, we considered that was an excellent reference for a process like the one that we were going through. So when we look at these different these 9 dimensions of the Tadat framework, we realize that there's definitely a connection if we cluster them, and I know that many of the Tadat members have issued a number of studies about these different connections. We can say that best practices are not only depending on compliance, but also on the integrity of the base of taxpayers, in the understanding of transparency and ethics, the efficiency of the systems inside tax administration. So all these different aspects of best practices, I think that we are in a good time to implement them, and with the cooperation with IMF and Tadat Secretariat, I think that we can make that possible.
Thank you, Dr. Grace. Abdelhamid, you've had plenty of experience in and outside of the region with tax practices. So I'm also curious what your take is on this idea of leapfrogging, using best practices from international best practices. And then we can discuss specifically the role of Tadat in this.
Well, I think that, when you're dealing with tax administration, tax law, you need to have a good mix between what is the local practice and what is the global best practice. And try to mix the two together so that basically you can implement it in the local environment and in your country or in your region, so that basically it creates the best results. The Tadat framework really provides an excellent reference for tax authorities to implement, because I think reviewing it and going through the training material, it presents really the best practice of managing an efficient and a well-productive tax administration. And I think that tax administrations in the region now have realized that they cannot do everything on their own. You cannot just say, well, I'm just going to rely on myself and I will not focus on global tax practice. On the contrary, I think they're very keen. They want to basically set up tax administrations. If it is like in the UAE, for example, it's a new administration based upon the best global tax practice. Other administrations are reforming and upgrading their processes and their systems and their human resources And I think what the role of TADAT and the focus of the issues that it focuses on provides a good starting point for tax administration to look at these points and to look on ways to improve their performance. At the end of the day, the business community, the taxpayers, they're dealing on a day-to-day basis with the tax administration, even we as tax advisors, for example. That is important, that we find that the tax administration is also being efficient, and it also helps in the collection of revenue. If it is not a well-efficient tax administration, you have a lot of disputes, a lot of outstanding taxes that are not being paid, penalties that are being assessed, and at the end of the day, the cost of collecting the revenue becomes more expensive than the taxes itself. So I think that there is a keen movement, and I see it in in the Gulf countries, in North Africa, and in other regions. They are working very closely with TADAT. They're working closely with international organizations on how to improve their best practices, their systems, their human resources training, keeping up to date with the international developments. Now, the speed of it may differ from one country to another, but I think that the intent or the intention is there, and I hope it continues. And I think having the TADAT process and people learning about TADAT, I think that improves and enhances the implementation of the global best practices. We cannot really shield ourselves from what's happening in the world, but but also at the same time, we need to combine it with our local practices. But we need to move fast. The challenge now is moving fast because the world is changing very fast even as we speak.
So that's a great point tying to our next question. So we're speaking about TADAT as the assessment, the set of best practices, but what role can it play in capacity development as a training tool? And obviously this is very relevant, so I'm curious what Dr. Grace thinks about that.
Well, I believe it's a fantastic tool to look into, and it's a very simple framework. It's a framework that pretty much clusters different dimensions and responsibilities, and that's what we really liked about this when we adopted it as a reference for the competencies framework that we have at the Tax Academy. So when we designed our competency framework, we identified approximately 8 clusters, and when we learned about TADAT dimensions, they just blended perfectly. So just to give you an idea of the 9 different dimensions of the TADAT framework, you have some that appear very endogenous to the tax administration. For example, the responsibility of tax administration to have an integrity, a very good tax payer base, the responsibility of the tax administration to communicate well with the taxpayers, the responsibility to manage their own risk. But then you have other dimensions that are a little bit more exogenous to the tax administration, something like the dimensions that relate to timely compliance or the accurate reporting. Those are dimensions that one may think, well, the tax administration cannot control how accurate the declaration is or how timely it is. It cannot control directly, and that's why we may consider them exogenous, but requires an education and communication of that society. And so it's precisely in that intersection between an efficient tax administration and building capacity within the tax administration. There are different divisions. There's the strategy department, their large accounts department, their human resources department. Needs to be balanced with also education to the society in general, to increase awareness about the importance of this new legal system, to increase the importance of voluntary compliance, and make those connections. So you have that second element. And then you have a third element of building capacity, which is building the capacity and sustaining the professional development of the tax agents. So the tax agents were onboarded at the very beginning of all this process. And so if we work together in a system by which the tax agents are constantly developing professionally, we can ensure that the system connects very well. You have an efficient tax administration that communicates with the society is aware, as interested in comply voluntarily. You have tax agents who advise the society properly. Everything connects well.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Abdelhamid.
Yes, I mean, I think that so far, I mean, based on my experience, whether it's within the tax administrations or externally with the taxpayers or the tax agents, there has always been the focus that the training in the tax administration is on technical or legal issue. What is the tax law, tax filings, etc. But I think the focus has not been really concentrated on things like tax administration from an administrative point of view. As Dr. Grace said, I mean, timeliness of filing, data system automation, internal risk assessment and risk management, all these things are there in any administration, whether it's the tax administration or any other administration, government or private sector. And I think that is good, because I think if we can expand and provide the training to the tax inspectors, to all levels of the tax administration, not just basically the internal audit department or the IT department, but to everybody, and also to the tax community, the tax advisor community, and the business community. I think then we realize what is really the best practice, what we can implement, and then if we agree on these goals, implementing it becomes very easy, so that we are not basically sitting there complaining about the tax administration all day. But what do we want them to do to improve? I mean, it's very easy to say, well, there is delay in responding to our appeals. Fine. What are you going to do? What is the proposed solution for that? Same way for the tax administration. It says, well, taxpayers are not filing on timely basis. You know, it's not really our fault. No, there are certain ways where we can basically, and processes we can implement to improve the timeliness of filing. So I think that reference is very important in that regard. We need to change our thinking. It's not just all about legal laws, appeals. It's really also about how do we manage a good and an efficient tax administration. And if we do it, I think it benefits everybody, taxpayers, the tax administration, the business community. And I think in any country, and I think the strategy here in the UAE and the GCC is the tax laws are there to drive and support the investment strategy, to encourage foreign direct investment, to encourage domestic investment. And I think the tax administration is an integral part of that. If we agree on these principles and objectives and reference that is included in that and other administrative issues, I think that will be for the benefit of all.
Thank you both. Thank you both for sharing your insights. Right now, I'll turn to some questions from our live audience on YouTube. The first question is, how does Cert plan to leverage that in helping tax administrations in the region? So some of these questions we might have touched on a bit, but it would be good to just get clarifications from both of you. Dr. Grace.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. So we have been working with TADAD for probably from the onset of the VAT rollout here in the UAE, and we have devised together a number of programs that are targeted not only to the professionals that are already in the market, for example, tax accountants or officials in the different ministries or public sector entities. But we believe that the capacity building has to start from universities. So we work, because we are the training arm of the higher colleges of technology, we work with our Bachelor of Accounting professors, supporting their efforts to include awareness sessions in their different curricula to address the different dimensions of the framework of TADAD. In 2020, as part of a large national emiratization program with one important ministry in the UAE. We developed a program for government tax officials, and we inserted in that program some dimensions of the TADAT framework. Most recently, our plans in the next few weeks is to roll out two important programs. The youth tax professional, TADAT foundations, so we can introduce the dimensions of TADAT to fresh graduates from the universities in the UAE. At the same time, the second program, which is the TADAT assessment training, with the support of clinics that are going to be delivered at Cert Tax Academy by Abdul Hamid. So we are definitely leveraging this. In addition to that, because the Cert Tax Academy does not only focus on training per se, but also in consultancy, assessments, and other aspects of risk management. We are also working on some other projects with different entities to support their plans on fiscal responsibility and voluntary compliance. So we are working very closely with TADAT to obtain their support and achieve these goals.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another question that's related. Someone in the audience is asking if you could advise on approximately the numbers of students or tax professionals that are expected to benefit from this initiative, either approximately or if you could elaborate on that a little bit on who's the target.
We focus our programs on not only tax accountants. There's not a national registry of tax professionals, so we can use a proxy of tax accountants as a large percentage of what we can recognize as a tax professional. But if we go by the number of, if we want to use a clear proxy, we can make the assumption that every organization, every entity that has a trade license in the UAE should have at least one accountant on board, in addition to federal tax agents working in the field. And then if you want to be a little bit more expansive, you could also calculate a percentage of students who are doing their accountancy bachelor's degree into this. We have, when we create our programs and when we think about the Tax Academy, we are expecting that the impact that we have in the market is not measured by the number of specific attendees that come to our trainings, but rather on the efforts that we do to disseminate the importance of fiscal responsibility and voluntary compliance. So our focus is on offering, on supporting, on being a partner of both the government in their role to be the best tax administrator in these new reforms, as well as a partner to academia interested in having their students or graduates learn more about taxation, and also a partner of the industry and be able to work together with these three pillars of the society to increase voluntary compliance and fiscal responsibility.
Thank you. Abdul Hamid, I'd like to give you an opportunity as well if you'd like to add anything to the questions.
Yes, I mean, I think as Dr. Grace, I think it really starts, for example, at the university level. I mean, there is a lot of countries now that have bachelor's degrees with a tax business, with a tax specialization. So tax administration would be part of that specialization in the universities and the higher colleges of technology. I think that's one element. The other element would be the tax advisors, practitioners. So there is a register with the Federal Tax Authority here that I think that is also another community that it would be good and beneficial for them to get that training. Then you have basically the Federal Tax Authority, members of the Ministry of Finance, people who are setting tax policies in the country. That's another element. And also in industry. And industry, you know, again, in every finance department, there has to be somebody who is responsible for tax issues, whether that's a full-time person or that's somebody who it is assigned to him in addition to their existing duties. And that, again, is important because they will have VAT, they may have excise tax, they may have income tax responsibilities, but also day-to-day dealings with the tax administration. So this, again, is very important for improving the tax environment. But I think also the public, maybe they don't want to go very highly specialized in how tax administration, but I think they would also be interested to know what is the best practice for tax administration. The media is also another aspect. They also are always keen. All these elements that we're talking about, all these stakeholders are very important. Again, it's not the numbers, it's basically the quality and the effectiveness of the training, but also the influence of the people that we are talking to and what's their influence on the community and society. Because tax is really now a discussion and a data discussion of every person. So it really affects us all in our lives. So I think we all have a stake or an interest in the effectiveness and the efficiency of the tax administrations.
Thank you. Another question we have is how can Cert collaborate with other tax administrations outside of the UAE? Has there been any collaborations in the past or in the future? How would you go about building collaboration?
Yeah, after the connection is a little bit, I couldn't hear you properly, but I think that you asked if Cert has plans to have collaborations with other tax administrations outside of the UAE. So yes, we have those plans, and that's why in the Tax Academy we have a number of experts. Abdelhamid has experience in the region. We have at least a cohort of approximately 10 to 12 Tax Academy experts who have experience in the region. So we are working actively in being able to expand the activities that we have to the other countries in the GCC. Yes. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. I think let me just check one last time. I think we're out of the audience questions. So on behalf of the TADAT Secretariat, I first wanted to thank both of you for sharing your insights, joining us today, and for answering the questions, and to our audience for joining us this early. And I invite them to stay engaged with TADAT. You can follow us on our LinkedIn page. You can subscribe to us on the YouTube channel, or follow us on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms. We will have more of these sessions in the future, so please stay tuned. And بالنيابة عن أمانة TADAT أنا حابب أشكر ضيوفنا، أشكر الدكتور عبد الحميد والجمهور على الأسئلة، والتواصل معنا ممكن تتابعونا على صفحتنا على لينكد إن أو على يوتيوب أو على أي منصة بودكاست تحبوا تتابعوها. Thank you everyone. Dr. Grayson Abdelhamid.
شكرا جزيلا وشكرا للسادة المشاركين. شكرا وشكرا لتداعي. Thank you very much.
Thank you.